So for our Black History Month, like talk in class and like our reflection, we talked a lot about like Martin Luther King and Chloe Valdari. So Chloe Valdari, like her theory of enchantment, I like the idea of like treating people with like fairness and treating everyone equally, which is what I think Martin Luther's like letter to the church was mainly about. Like he wants equality and he doesn't want people to like keep saying like, oh, wait and timing. Like, oh, they talked a lot about like, oh, why won't you just like wait for a good moment, or like why can't you wait till you're free? But he says like you can't put a timing on man's freedom, and he speaks a lot about that. And he also talks about like how like the direct action didn't just come out of nowhere. Like they initially tried to negotiate and they're like the promise was essentially broken, and he kind of like is showing how like urgent it is. And this reminds, like, his letter to the church reminded me a lot of, like, now versus then. Like, he talked about police brutality, and it's, like, this letter was written so long ago, and you can see that there's no, like, really big change in society then versus now. He talked about how the policemen kick and curse people, and then you see, like, recent things like George Floyd or Breonna Taylor, like, just a lot of police brutality, and you can, like, kind of see how treatment of Black people may have changed a little bit, but not, like, enough where you can say that the world is, like, perfect, essentially. And he talked a lot about like laws and independent moral standing, and he said like how some laws are meant to be broken because laws can be unjust. And it kind of like reminds me how we kind of silence people in today's society when they don't like essentially follow certain laws. But some laws are meant to be broken because people are allowed to have independent thought, independent like action, because obviously not everything is fair. And he relates this a lot with like Jesus and his journey. When he says that he was ashamed that the church called him an extremist, like he said, was Jesus not extremist for love? Then he starts talking about Paul in Galatians, like we talk about in class, about how like Paul kind of called out the church on their actions, and basically how Paul was an extremist for what he believed in. And something I found really like important was when he said like, what are you gonna be an extremist for? He kind of shows like he calls us out and kind of says like, what are we gonna stand on? Like what beliefs are we gonna hold to be true? Instead of like just staying quiet like the people of the church are. We're supposed to kind of like express our beliefs in a way, and we're not supposed to stay quiet. And something else is like he talks a lot about like tension. He says that they didn't bring the tension, they're just exposing the tension. And I think a lot of the times like we try to avoid tension and we try to like remove away from like conflict because we're scared of like being singled out. But that's exactly what the church was doing. He like is calling out the church, saying how he's disappointed in them. Christians used to be the ones who were like kind of separated, and now that the Black people are being separated, Christians aren't there to like help them. And this reminds me of like now I feel like sometimes the church doesn't really stand on what they're like talking about. They talk about love but express hate, and like they're saying like there's no hate like Christian love. And I just feel like this is seen a lot in like his writing. He's talking about how he's like kind of disappointed in the church, but he says that you can't really be disappointed when there was no like good fruit growing out of them anyways. And I think this like that just relates a lot. And he talks about how they're meant to be silenced, and it reminds me like now, especially cancel culture in today's society, how we cancel and we like kind of mute people who we don't agree with. When we hear things that we don't like, you just simply like scroll or like comment hateful things and try to like cancel out what you don't like in today's society. He talks about how that relates. Even back then they would silence voices that they didn't want to be heard. And he also expresses a lot of like urgency for the things that he talks about. He says that we are sinking. He said that we are, hold on, let me get the page for you. He says that now's the time to lift our national policy from the quicksand of racial injustice to the solid rock of human dignity. He says that we aren't standing on solid ground essentially until we like kind of bring up what is being suppressed in a way. Like all the things that we're suppressing the hate, the brutality, like through words. And he's kind of saying that it's urgent that we like bring these, like we start talking about these things, because right now like the world is sinking, and to be standing on solid ground we have to all be like equal and unified. And he also talks a lot about
red light camera ahead.
Kind of Christians, like I feel like a lot of the times like Christians don't really like, they say things without actually like acting on them. Like Christians can like, in a way I feel like the Christian community can be like very hypocritical for like the things that we believe in. I don't think it's like Christians. I think it's the title Christian sometimes kind of can give like a lot of backlash, because I feel like the way a lot of Christians are represented in society is not the way God intended for Christians to kind of act in the first place. So I can see a lot of the times when people kind of say, oh, they don't like Christians, for example, they can like, they see how some Christians are represented in society. Like I feel like people think Christians are kind of just full of like hate sometimes, or they may just like act out in ways that seem very judgmental. But I think that like God calls people to not show like hate towards other people's actions, but kind of be able to call out your own sins and other people's sins and kind of just push other people towards God. But you can see even in Martin Luther's letter, like he himself as a Christian, he had generational like Christians in his family, pastors in his family, and you can tell that he's disappointed in the church, but he's not disappointed in God per se. He's disappointed in the way that the church has portrayed themselves. And I don't think that's changed a lot in society. Like I think a lot of people, they turn away from God and they turn away from Christianity because of the way that Christians represent themselves in society. And I think like this is why I think like people should be focusing more like on a relationship with God. Like when I think of like, oh, I'm a Christian, I'd rather have a relationship with God than kind of like group myself in that way, because I feel like a lot of people can take that term in so many different ways dependent on their experience. And I think it's just really important to like separate yourself, kind of like Martin Luther did. He was aware that he needed to go on a separate journey. He was aware that he couldn't be with the church in this way. He knew what he needed to do. He was like, you know, kind of spreading his message like Paul was. He found the injustice, he searched for the injustice, and you can see that there were few Christians in the church who decided to follow him on his path and go for the injustice, but then a good majority of Christians decided to stay quiet and kind of say that this isn't it's not their problem, this is a social agenda. And I just think like you can see the difference in like being a person, like a child of God, versus being a Christian by label. And yeah, bye, Mr. Fufili.